This podcast is brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling for those who make and drink great spirits. Join our free email newsletter for technical and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Learn more at spiritsanddistilling.com.
Welcome, guys, to episode number 15 of the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. My name is Sydney Jones. Today, we are talking to two outstanding people from Maplewood Brewery and Distillery, Adam Smith and Adam Cieslak. Did I just butcher that again?
No, that was right. It was perfect.
First time's the charm.
That's it.
Most people just call us the Adams at this point.
The Adams, Adam 1, Adam 2. They're from my old neck of the woods in Chicago, and I have been a big fan of what they've been producing spirit-wise for a while. They're a big deal in the brewing world, been pretty regularly featured in Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, right?
That's right. I'd say we're probably the biggest.
Probably the biggest, the best by far.
But we've had some stuff in Craft Beer and Brewing. It's always fun to talk to those folks. And
we're not going to talk about any of it today.
That's right. We're talking about distilling.
We're going to talk about gin. We are going to talk about some Fernet. And my favorite subject, especially when talking with brewers that are making whiskey now, a brewer's perspective on American single malt, because it's such a unique and interesting perspective versus non-brewers and people who have approached single malt from a Scottish perspective. This American single malt category is growing so much and it's so interesting. So I love hearing people who have made beer, how they are approaching that category and putting their own spin on it. But before we get into all of that fun stuff, G&D Chillers understands that each distillery's chilling requirements are unique. On every distillery project, G&D offers the front-end design and engineering that your team needs at no cost to you. Jim Kerr, VP of Manufacturing at Red Boot Beverages, says G&D has been with us since the early days. Their knowledgeable engineers and service techs are there when we need them. We're in the midst of a large expansion, and they have been there right there from the beginning to select chiller solutions for today and the future. Reach out for a quote at gdchillers.com. And for more than 11 years, ABS Commercial has been your full-service equipment manufacturer, designing quality distillation equipment ranging from 50 liters to 5,000 liters. Whether you're establishing a new distillery or expanding into a brewstillery, like what we're talking about today, their team of experienced engineers and designers works with you to develop customized distilling solutions. With their consultative approach, they tailor to your production capacity, space constraints, and budgetary considerations to help you create quality crafted spirits. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized distilling needs. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
You guys have a very diverse portfolio of spirits. You make rum, you make gin, you make barrel-aged gin, which I love. You make a lot of really cool American single malt. You're making bourbon. You're making rye. Throwing a lot of things out there. Can you kind of talk me through the process of how you developed this portfolio as you got into distilling from just brewing?
Yeah, so that was the plan from day one, which was insane. So we opened in 2014. We just had our 10-year anniversary over the summer. And the plan was, we liked beer, we liked spirits. We had been home brewing for the longest time, years of that. We were home distilling, only water, of course, but doing that for a while. And as things go, you decide to open a brewery, but then you decide to open a brewery and distillery because that is what we love to do. So initially, we wanted to kind of do something, at least at the time, that was pretty, a lot more, I don't want to say rare, maybe that's right, but a lot more unique than I'd say now, as you see a lot more breweries getting into distillation and a lot more, say, brewing style grains being used in whiskeys and what have you. back then it was a unique thing. I think we're one of a handful of places in the country doing it. And so we started way back when making American malt whiskeys, largely based on our brewing ingredients. And it kind of just snowballed from there. We have a really creative team. We liked what was going on when we used more beer forward grains or traditional beer ingredients. And we just added to that. We started with filling some whiskey barrels, and we started obviously with the gin, so we can have something to get out there while all the whiskeys were aging. And slowly but surely, we added on more items. We started doing more different varieties. We have Smith and coming up with ideas like, hey, him and our head brewer now loves Fernet. So it's like, okay, let's do a Fernet. And just, I don't know, it's a rabbit hole. I think it's a blessing and a curse, because we all kind of like a lot of different things, and we all appreciate, I think, just well done different spirits, beers, whatever it is. And it's hard for us to not or say no to, hey, let's try to do this ourselves and do a really good version of it.
It's very much, I think, like if you give a mouse a cookie, if you give a mouse a beer, then maybe a mouse is also going to want a malt whiskey. And if you give a mouse a malt whiskey, maybe the mouse is also going to want gin. If you give a mouse a gin, maybe he's going to want Fernet.
Yeah.
I think having our tasting room as well, we get a lot of requests from the bartenders and the GM about, I have an idea for a cocktail, or randomly, you ever thought about making a pear liqueur? And, of course, no, I haven't, but I could certainly research it. So a lot of liqueurs and things like that are requested through our tasting room, through our bar here. And I think that's, like Adam said, it's before you know it, we have 7 different liqueurs, and that's on top of everything else you named. So Fernet being one of those. We do a coffee liqueur. We saw kind of locally not a lot of coffee liqueurs on the market, but espresso martini being one of the most popular, cocktails in the scene, it was something that we felt we had to do, and partner up with the same roaster that we use for our beer, for cuppa, for our barrel aged stouts and things like that. So working with them was really cool. We love that collaborative thing. So anyway, it's just, it really snowballs, and before you know it, your portfolio is completely out of control, which is not a bad thing. It's just it becomes, for us who we're laughably small space wise here, it becomes a balancing act of, when can we do this? And, we have to really time everything really well when we're scheduling this stuff out. And that's where it becomes hard. Making it and stuff like that, obviously, that's all done in the R&D, and that's hard as well. But yeah, once you're in it, it's scheduling all that in our little space can be so hard.
Yeah.
I guess we wouldn't have it any other way.
Can you walk me through kind of the process of, you're a small distillery, you are also balancing the beer side as well, but you're limited in space. Most likely, it sounds like you guys are distilling off of some smaller equipment as well. How do you kind of set that schedule? Walk me through that when you're developing this crazy portfolio. What does your typical distilling week look like when you're trying to balance all of these needs alongside a full brewing schedule? It's a lot of juggling that I'm picturing.
It is. So the head brewer, Roger, and myself, we sit down, and it takes a while. And we do it usually month by month, 2 months in advance, 2-3 months in advance. And it takes him and I coming together because, like you said, it's balancing. We have two steel fermentation vessels that we use for RTDs. So ready to drink, we do canned cocktails. We're building those in our steel fermenters. We also have another that we do some specialty whiskeys, and we do fat pug. Mostly our American single malts are all done in a steel ferment. And I'm only designated steel because we also, I was just going to say, we also have oak vats, foeders that we have designated for ferment on the distillation side. So we do a rum in a 30 barrel foeder. We do like Adam said, Heritage is an American single malt that we're about to release in a month, and that's all fermented in oak. And our bourbon is fermented in oak. And really, that was kind of a cool thing that happened because the sour beer scene in Chicago, or really nationally or worldwide, kind of just never really blossomed the way all the brewers wanted it to. And long story short, we decommissioned these foeders, not wanting to use them for sour beer anymore. And we were able, luckily, because we're a distillery, to repurpose those for ferments that are destined only for the distillery or the still. So those are a little easier to balance out, as far as time and scheduling and everything, because those are just our fermenters. But there are two other fermenters we're sharing. And then, of course, we take the packaging guy away when we do packaging. So it's really, like I said, it's Roger and I sitting for a number of hours and figuring out how we can take, our packaging guy away.
You're also sharing the brew house for all our washes, So we use our brew house to create all those. We don't have a separate production, I guess, equipment for any of the hot side spirit washes that we brew.
Yes, and that Adam brings up a good point. So obviously that's the most contentious piece of that scheduling, of course. So just making sure we're communicating prior to having these scheduling meetings with sales to make sure we're hitting all their needs. So it's a really fine balancing act of kind of getting all these departments involved. And we're lucky we are a bigger brewery, so we have insight. We do a lot of co-pack, so we're doing some contract brewing outside of our facility. So a lot of our production in the beer scene, or in the beer side, I should say, is done out of house. So that helps us balance a little bit more too. But all the R&D, all the specialty stuff, that's all done here on the beer side. So we still have that balancing act. It's fun in a way. Once you get it scheduled out.
Yeah, it sounds like Willy Wonka's, factory, but with a lot of working pieces and less dying children and vats of chocolate, But so you mentioned the oak fermentation. Yeah, I was going to say just
today, first thing I come in and I charge the still. I get that going, and prior to pulling heads out of there, I'm carbonating a canned cocktail to make sure I have that to the proper volumes for the packaging day tomorrow. And while that's running CO2, I'm also dumping 4 casks that we're having to proof later today so that we could package on Monday. And that was just prior to getting on the phone today. And then I went ahead and finished that run, and we filled the still, and we're doing a second run today of our fest whiskey. So it's just, the days go by quick here.
What does cleaning and maintaining all of that equipment look like, especially when you're switching from one thing to the other? Brewers do CIP better than anybody, so you guys are well equipped, but still it seems like a monumental task in my mind. All I can think of is just the amount of cleaning you have to do to keep from cross-contaminating flavors and stuff.
We do a lot. Yeah, we do a lot of cleaning, and I'd say pretty much our distillation side of things, it follows our, I guess, brewery side, standards of keeping tanks clean, and we just do everything the same way because exactly what you said. there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different flavors. There's from the fooders, there's certainly bacteria in the fooders. So we don't want that going to places that we don't want it to go. So we have designated pumps, hoses to separate those things. But as far as maintaining the fermenters and all that, we do it the same way across the board for all of our equipment. And maybe it's overkill on, with some examples, but we sleep better at night just knowing that if the worst thing is we're spending a little bit more money on, cleaning chemicals and caustic and stuff like that, at the end of the day, it's worth it. So, but it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
Sure. Yeah.
And I guess maybe it's less, I don't know what the right word is, not shocking, but less of a hassle because all of us come from the brewing side. So we're used to just being neurotic about everything and going overkill without having running stuff through the still. So it's just second nature, I think, for a lot of us. So it's maybe not as big of a deal just because we're used to it.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
For sure. My question is, I know we talk a lot in, distillery land about how there are so many different places that flavor is developed, and a lot of those we can't control. They come from outside yeast. They come from sometimes some spontaneous contamination, and that can be some fun like serendipity that happens with your spirit. Do you find that doesn't necessarily happen as often because you guys are so stringent on cleaning? We don't have to be in traditional distilleries. It's like, well, a little bit of wild yeast got in there. Such is life.
Yeah. So in our stainless fermenters, everything's clean ferment, just because we don't necessarily want to get those bacteria up or wild yeasted. But our fooders were inoculated from our sour program with all sorts of fun stuff. And we found that, to your point, we have some very, I'd say, robust cultures in our fooders that are nice. And they come originally from our beer side of things, but they add a lot of nice character to the washes that are fermented in there, and they sour up and they add all these nuances that turn out to be wonderful once you run them through the still. So we're not trying to kill those bugs in the fooders, I guess, put it that way.
No. And we definitely had some inspiration, and we were Ari, who's a distiller here as well, and I were at it was either ADI or ACSA at one of the workshops there, and it was specifically about wild rum ferment and mimicking that in in an American environment, and that's where a lot of the inspiration came. And we came back here, gung ho about transforming these fooders, is specifically one of them for rum, so we can kind of emulate that dunder concept, and getting that acidity down really low. We're not super low, but we're low threes, within a matter of a week or two. With the rum sits a little longer. The whiskeys we try to get those out quicker, but we're still mid to low threes in pH on those. So it's funny you bring that up, because that was, like Adam said, that was a big part of the concept for converting those fooders over to fermentation vessels for us. Was
yeah,
so
I remember
one
of the years and years ago. This is, if you'll remember this, been around forever with us. When we were brewing the Pilsner wash, and we were not intending to have it sour up. This is something that was done in stainless, but I want to say at that time we don't add barely any hops, to our washes or anything like that. We add just the smallest amount when it's going into stainless, just for antibacterial purposes. It just helps keep things a little more stable. And this may have been before we were even doing that. And something happened in the batch. It was just something got in there, and then we ran it through the still anyway. And that whiskey turned out fantastic. And I remember I was like, oh man, this is awesome. It was a nice, unexpected bonus, I guess.
Yeah, that was our lesson in low pH, adding brightness, and we got like a floral quality from that finished product out of the barrel. And that opened our eyes at the time to those happy accidents that you mentioned, Sydney.
Yeah, I love that, because so many brewers that I talk to, happy accidents for them are like, oh, fuck, like something terrible has happened.
Yeah.
And it's fun talking to you guys who now have this distillery perspective where happy accidents can produce some of the coolest things that you make. Souring and, low pHs and, either intentional or accidental bacterial contamination is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. We're incorporating a lactic can into our yeasting process that will be introducing a quantity of soured beer that has naturally developed a lacto culture that we've pasteurized, but then we feed that back into our live yeasting program. And it's a fascinating process and such a driver of flavor that I don't think gets enough attention when we talk about whiskey, especially, rum, we talk about it all the time, and, mezcal and agave spirits and, Japanese whiskey. But I think it's unexplored territory in American whiskey that I'm hoping, and it sounds like you guys are at the forefront of that, just playing around with some of these contaminating bits that can make such cool flavors.
Yeah, that, and I'd say even different yeasts, there's all sorts of, go ahead, Smith. We're
literally on the same wavelength. I think we're both about to talk about we have some like Clasenii, some Brett Clasenii, and some hand-picked Brett strains from Omega, that really come through on specifically our American, like you said, Sydney. They're really nice on whiskeys. That these low pHs or acidity, and the beer that's going into the still is just pineapple juice because of these Brett strains, and the acidity really adds to that quality, even in the aroma. And we're finding that the fruit quality on even now coming out of the barrel is just phenomenal. So. Yeah, the wild yeast strains as well as the acidity are really cool. Really add some nuance to these whiskeys.
Now I'd say you dip into the clean yeast side, and you got all these, traditional beer yeasts that are available, and it's pretty amazing to see how much influence and nuance and flavor accents that you can get by using an American strain versus an English strain versus, XYZ. And we're, again, fortunate enough that we have a lot of experience with these beer yeasts. So we like to, I guess, maybe flex them in some of our spirits now and then when we're trying to achieve a certain flavor profile.
Yeah, and I think especially an American single malt, which is such like an unexplored, well, it's not unexplored, but it's an undefined and not well understood category yet. We're all kind of vying to make our mark and figure out what the American single malt category is. And brewers, you guys have the whole rainbow to play with when it comes to yeast, and the whole galaxy to play with when it comes to different strain, like different types of malt. When distillers talk about malt, they are talking about malt for the sake of so many different types of malt to play with.
I almost feel like and this is maybe less the case now than it was, but I remember when we started doing that and incorporating different malts, and there's a lot of just maybe hesitation is the right word It's like, oh, well, why would you do this? Well, why wouldn't we do this? If you use roasted malts and chocolate malts in a mash for a whiskey, you get all these wonderful, wonderful toffee and kind of cocoa powder notes down the line. And it turns out to be really, really, really tasty. But it almost reminds me of beer in a way. It's like when Sierra Nevada first started putting out their pale ale, that was outrageous, the amount of hops they were using. And it turns out it's not even comparatively, it's not that many hops, but you just didn't do stuff like that back then. And I feel like that's where a lot of maybe more young distilleries are at, where they're starting to experiment more with this stuff, which is great because it turns out a lot of this stuff is really tasty.
And the more American single malt that I taste personally, I get a lot of caramel in chocolate notes, specifically in this New American oak, like this single malt that's aged in New American oak, when our palates are used to used cooperage with these type of whiskeys. I do get a lot of caramel and cocoa powder notes, just from the barrel and the way it plays off the malt. And adding roasted barley or chocolate malt, black patent, whatever dark specialty malt, whatever you want to add, and still have it be an American single malt designation, you're really amplifying those notes that are coming from the marriage of barrel and malt. And we won a double gold in San Francisco for our American single malt that uses roasted barley and chocolate malt and things like this. Because I think it's playing off those notes that you're getting, because of the style. It exists really because you're allowed to take a malt whiskey and now age it in a barrel, and it's a new oak, a new char oak barrel. So I love that. I love being able to amplify these with the malt as well, and it's paid off for us. The hard part at the beginning when the designation came out was that recipe had oats in it, and it had midnight wheat and I think chocolate rye. So these specialty malts that are not quote unquote malt, oats and rye and things like that and wheat. So that was a pivot we had to take when the designation, was deciding what it is, what it has to be. So that was cool too, and that changed the product a little bit, and we were able to see that a few years down the road. So adjusting these malts makes a big difference in the final product, especially in like I guess I'm specifically talking about with American single malt. So we love that here. We love playing with the malt and amplifying these styles.
Now, as you're playing around with malt, is there any that you have found that just simply do not work in a distilled spirit setting, that you're like, the vibes are off, the flavors are off, the yield is off, it's not worth the cost? Is there any like failed experiments that you guys have had playing around with malt from transferring it over to a distillery mindset?
I would say this, and it's mostly, this was more driven from our brew house setup, but we originally started with 100% malted rye, and that is, I guess, more of a distilling kind of malt. And some breweries use it, but it's a pain in the ass to work with, as you probably know. But it's a royal pain in the ass to work with on a infusion style mash tun, such as what we have, and that just we tried, and we
don't have rakes. So everything we do is manual.
We've given up on that.
You said,
but 100... I don't know if you have any.
You said 100% malted rye. All I heard was I made concrete. That's what. Yeah.
So
I made grainy concrete.
And our brew house, our mash tun is high enough where we were able to yield about half of our initial volume that we wanted with lautering, and then by that time it turned to snotty concrete, and it was probably 7 at night at that time. We started early in the morning like we always do, and our hot liquor tank, we drain that and we just let it gravity lauder into the hot liquor tank overnight, which still only collected maybe like 20% more at that point.
Yeah.
So we wound up with a batch. It was not the yield we had hoped for, but it tasted really good. But that was, essentially that was the first and last time we did that. I think we tried it one more time and it was not much better. So, but that's my grain that I don't like to use. But Smith, you might have some beer grains or something that you guys have tried and don't like as much.
Not necessarily. I think, high amounts of melanoidin malt, or even like a high amounts of Munich malt, can be a little just weird in the final product. I think we used a lot of melanoidin in one of our fest whiskeys. Yeah. And our fest whiskey is like kind of just essentially a fest beer, fermented and distilled. So it's pretty much Munich and Pilsner malt. And the first year we did it, we thought, let's amplify that malty character and put all this melanoidin, which is a malt that Weyermann in Germany makes, which is kind of recreates the Maillard reaction. Yeah. Well, in small doses.
Yes. Well, yes.
And then we put, larger doses in a beer destined for the still. And it just, I think, was a little cloying even in the distillate. Came through maybe a little too much. It's very unfermentable as well. So, a lot of that stuff can come out in heads too, and it becomes a waste of product, a waste of money, I should say. So we don't really do that anymore. But I honestly, I think in small enough doses, small enough percentages, you can pretty much put anything in there. And yeah, my answer would also be rye. We just in our facility, unfortunately, because it's single infusion, like Adam said, we don't have rakes. Everything is hand stirred. We don't mess with it. But we could do corn. We could do wheat, no problem.
Unless you have like a constant agitation on a rye mash like that and a hefty dose of exogenous enzymes, you're just creating a world of hurt for each other. But, these are the things that are important to talk about, what works from a flavor perspective, what works from a cost perspective, and what doesn't work from a cost perspective. Oftentimes, something sounds really good in theory and maybe it even tastes good, but if you can't afford to make it, or if it breaks your spirit or your equipment in the process, then is it worth it?
Yeah. And we do get rye in the brew house. In the facility, because we source from MGP as well for one of our canned cocktails. But Adam mentioned it at the top that we have like a finishing project that we do all these finishing barrels, and that's blended with our single malt and MGP high rye bourbon. And from time to time, we can get some 95.5 rye whiskey from them. That's pretty well aged, that we also have been finishing in some specialty barrels. So it didn't stop us, because we do love rye and we had to bring it in. So that was a good way for us to bring it in. A big reason we picked the high rye bourbon from MGP and the rye whiskey, the 95.5 from them, was because we can't do rye ourselves. So we want to be able to release it because we like it, and being able to blend it and age it and try to make it our own was fun.
Yeah. So like, speaking of, if you are, planning on a distillery or a brewery launch, if you're having these conversations about bringing in spirits or working with weird grain or weird yeast or whatever else, adding a distillery to your brewery like these guys did, or if you're just considering purchasing an existing brewing or distilling business, then you should visit breweryworkshop.com for more information about the Brewery and Distillery Workshop, brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling and Craft Beer and Brewing. Over 4 days, you'll learn what it takes to get a successful craft beverage business off the ground through panel discussions, working group sessions, technical tours, and more. Get your ticket now at breweryworkshop.com so you can have more of these fun conversations on what will work for your business and what sometimes is really, really hard and tricky to do. But that's cool. Bringing in rye from I love MGP rye. One of the 7-year ryes that I have. It's so good. When I think of like a really good house rye style, I think MGP does theirs so well for so many different people. But switching gears a little bit. So we've talked a lot about your single malts, and we've talked a little bit about your experimental liqueurs that you do. I am a gin freak. I love gin. I made a lot of gin. I would love to chat with you guys more, especially about your spruce gin, because spruce tips are something that I am fascinated by. I never got to work with them, but I know they show up in beer. And using them in a gin was kind of always like a bucket list thing that I really wanted to work with. So the spruce gin intrigues me a lot. I've had the brewer's gin as well. So you guys talk about malt as if it's colors in your coloring box in terms of flavor. How do you kind of translate that over to gin land, where you're working with all of these different flavors from different botanicals?
But I remember it was one of the first, like the Illinois Craft Spirits Convention, or what is that what it's called? What do they have here?
Oh, it's the Independent Craft Spirit Expo.
Yeah. So Ari, our other head distiller, and my business partner, we were at one of these. Smith, you probably were there too, way back when. And I remember
it was a Vicar,
right? Yeah, Vicar. They had their, I don't know how you say it, but I think it's Vicar, but
Minnesota distillery.
Yeah, they had a spruce gin, they had a cedar gin, and then they had their regular juniper forward gin. And I remember when we tried the spruce and cedar gins, it was like, wow, this is incredible. And especially with the spruce gin, because that is so, spruce is so close to juniper in a lot of ways, aromatically. And they pair together so well that that's initially where we got the inspiration to do it. Smith and Ari have kind of taken it from there, but you could talk more to it. But it was just one of those eye-opening moments that, wow.
Yeah, I 100% remember that, because we had, and I remember the brand and everything. That was such a great and still a great product. It was inspirational that we started formulating our own spruce gin. But like you mentioned, Sydney, we do love spruce as a brewery. We use it in a couple of beers. I'd always loved, there's a brewery in just north of us in Wisconsin. And they would always they had 2 or 3 beers where they, forage their own spruce. And I always look forward to those beers. So definitely something that I'm passionate about as well. And Ari was totally into it when we pitched it. Obviously plays really well off the juniper. But I think it has more of a Christmas tree character, the blue spruce that we get, right?
Yeah.
And I think when it's coming off the still, you can get a lot of that melon character as well. That plays really nicely off of, for me, a lot of the roots, like the orris root. It's the melon and floral thing play really well. But just to kind of talk about our recipe, we take a look at the juniper and the coriander as like the base. Obviously the juniper, just like everybody else usually does. Well, no, we make this very traditional grains of paradise, and there's grapefruit, orange, and lemon peel. We put pink peppercorns and telecherry peppercorns in this, and then a lot of spruce. There's like 3 times the spruce to juniper by weight. So it's a ton. And then we also add juniper and a ton of spruce in the gin basket as well. So that gets vapor distilled on the way to the condenser. So, and the other thing we add in there is rooibos. The rooibos, the red tea, really, I think, grounds those wintry notes and gives it a nice earthiness that's not, piney or whatever you want to call it. But I really like this as well because it is a traditional gin, but it has a little something extra, and it's not one-dimensional to me. It's not just juniper and spruce. It has all that stuff that I mentioned that plays really well. So it does have that dry gin character with that little something extra that I love spruce for that.
Since spruce is kind of your hero botanical, have you found when you have distilled this over the batches and gotten it at different times, have any variability between that botanical, between your batches that has influenced its flavor? It's always something that I think about, especially with botanicals that are being foraged, as someone who has done that for gin. Sometimes it was super hard to get consistency between batches with using that hero botanical that was coming from a natural source like the woods.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say there are batches like when we get it, this newest batch I think was, I forget, do you know when the harvest, is it spring for spruce? I'm bad. We obviously don't harvest it ourselves. Forage it.
Yes.
We get it from Spruce on Tap, actually. Holler to them because they're out in Colorado and they are very consistent. We have had batches that are more, I would say that are fresher, and I think they're more expressive out of the still.
It's like an early spring is when they harvest them.
Yeah. So when we usually do this like 2 times a year. We don't, I think most people probably have a similar scenario with their gin. We make a tote or 2 of it and then sit on that for a while. And then we'll add that to our we have 2 RTDs that use it. And then we'll filter our cold crash and filter for bottling as well. So we try to time it. So it's always kind of beginning of summer or that springtime. But we did just make some, and we got fresh spruce. Or I shouldn't say it's fresh spruce, but we ordered spruce from our guy, and I'll be honest, it was just as fresh now as I remember it being when we made it last spring or this past spring. So I have noticed variations, but they're never enough where we have to, worry about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think this guy picks he does a lot of foraging, and I think he picks most of it in one season. So, we've had good luck.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I was just wondering, are you seeing any like volatility with the spruce notes as well, being that it is like a fresh botanical? Do you see you lose any like of these more delicate top notes that you get from the spruce, that kind of like floral piney flavor? Does that degrade over time using fresh spruce, or do you find that it stays pretty well in your bottle? It's a botanical I've never worked with, so I have a billion questions and I'm going to be nerdy and weird about it.
Oh, for sure. And we thought about that too, which is a big reason we wanted to add it to the gin basket. I mean, we have a gin basket, so why wouldn't you anyway? But the thought was that hopefully it's while it's being quote unquote vapor distilled, we're in a way, right? We're having vapor hit that gin basket. I feel like that aroma is more volatile, and we lose that pretty quickly. Even like as it's being proofed and everything, you're starting to lose some of that from the gin basket. But the spruce that I macerate, and we do about a minimum 20-hour maceration on our gin. I honestly don't see, it seems to do well on that hot side, on that maceration side, but I have seen volatility from the addition that we do add in the gin basket, for sure.
Gotcha. Now, and is the base spirit that you're using for the spruce gin and the brewer's gin, are those all neutral, or are you also incorporating some of like your whiskey distillates? Mm-hmm.
It's an outstanding question.
I mean,
It's
I just
not
figured
all
you
neutral.
guys, you're
No.
you potentially could, because you are playing around with such cool whiskey flavors, and I would think of no better way to utilize, malted barley as a botanical than blending it in potentially to a gin. But that's also me spitballing.
Yeah, no, we have a gin base that we'll make, and that's from barley and stuff like that. That does get blended with some neutral spirit. But Smith could talk. But you could touch on that. That's your wheelhouse.
Yeah, we have the majority of the maceration is done on neutral grain. It's usually about like a 192 and proof, and then we add our trying to look for the percentage, but we do add a percentage of a 2-row wash that we make. That's just 2-row barley. So these our brewers here distill it about twice a year, and we keep that on hand in the distillery. So we'll blend in about, I think it's 10% off the top of my head. I'll say 10%. We do about 10% 2-row wash on top of the neutral grain spirits, and it does have a lot of quality. And I say 2-row wash, it's essentially just a single malt whiskey that we're adding. That we run it with the full column and everything, so it's a very clean spirit. That we're not like running a low line on that or anything. That's a I want to say the proof on that 2-row is it's about 155, and then all in we'll proof that down to 120, and that'll sit in the pot with the botanicals for 24 hours. But that was always the intention. I'm glad you asked that, was to create some bond from our brewery in there. So the 2-row barley was always from the beginning going to be in that gin for us.
I love non-neutral bases in gin. They're not common.
Yes.
It's a very Dutch Geneva perspective, but I think utilizing grain as a botanical is such a cool idea, and you can get such cool results from it. St. George, they have their Reposado gin, which is, their rye whiskey distillate that I believe is the gin base for that. Few, our gin that we made when I was at Few, was our white whiskey base, and it was 180 proof, and it was just shy of being neutral, but it was enough that it added like body, and like you do need to treat that as a botanical. But it's a really foreign concept, I think, still, and I'm hoping to see more of these like funky non-neutral gin bases emerge, especially as we're getting more into barrel-aged gin territory, which is, oh my God, I die over barrel-aged. Favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, we love it.
Yeah. Are you guys doing the spruce?
That's a bold statement.
I do. It makes me so happy. Yeah. It combines all the things that I love. It combines gin. It combines barrel influence. It combines funky, interesting flavors that you can't really predict, especially when they're in barrel. It's very rare for me to meet a barrel-aged gin that I do not enjoy because I'm addicted to them now. But I see that you guys are making one as well. Did the spruce gin end up being barrel aged, or is it the brewer's gin?
It's the spruce gin, yes. But we do a variation on it.
Yeah.
It's just we take some of the we adjust the botanicals, so we do make a run specifically for barrel aged. So it's not just spruce gin barrel aged. It's everything's adjusted for the barrel. So we use our American single malt. So it's second use barrels, and we take down the spruce. We take down some of the citrus and things like this. I'll try to pull up the recipe actually, so I could maybe, because we haven't done this one in a while, believe it or not. Barrel-aged gin does not sell well.
I know, it breaks my heart. People don't, if you are listening to this, drink more barrel-aged gin. It's so cool. A lot of people don't understand what it is. If you're listening to this, most likely you are also a nerd though, and you're probably in the know. And hopefully you're already drinking it. But it's one of those things where like I preach that gospel very passionately because I've just had such cool results from it.
Big time. And we have too. We love it, and I love barrel-aged gin, and bartenders love barrel-aged gin. I mean, they have so much fun with it. So every time we do sell it, it's 100% to an on-premise, interesting bar programs. And recently, our bartenders have started to do a great job with it.
Awesome. Yeah, barrel gin, big fan. I think I gave your spruce gin as a gift to a good friend of mine once who absolutely loves gin, and she loved it as well. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Always like to hear that.
So we've talked about gin. We've talked about a little bit about liqueurs, and we talked about American single malt.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? The finishing barrels that you mentioned to me, tell me about that, because I know you guys are working with Amberana, and I talked with my friend Sienna about Amberana earlier this month.
Oh, yeah. So I'd say it's Smith's baby project that is quickly becoming, I think, a bigger project that we're all super excited about. Smith, just I'll give you guys a little background on I guess maybe how things got to this point. But before we were doing any of the barrel finishing stuff, we done a lot of barrel-aged beer, and throughout the years of doing that, have made a lot of contacts. Mostly, Smith has made a lot of contacts with the really cool barrel suppliers and folks who can get some really fun stuff. So then, the logical next step was trying to do something to, start with a really good whiskey to begin with, work, blend it thoughtfully with ours or not, and add another layer to it. And Smith, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your barrels?
Yeah, the Amberana was one that we were offered early on. That one was kind of hard to find initially, I think. And we work with, I think initially we got that from Kelvin Cooperage, who has made some of our barrels, some of our new American barrels. So we had a good relationship with them. So they offered us some Amberana. We took one initially because we had never worked with it. The price was a little high at the beginning too, with Amberana. It's a specialty, obviously, exotic wood from Brazil. And it was insane when it finally came in. Just this empty barrel completely just took over the aroma in the whole distillery, brewery. And everybody who came in, I think we were having an event that day, was just like, what's the smell in here? It smelled like cinnamon, nutmeg, eucalyptus, like this crazy herbal aroma. And we were just like blown away by this barrel. I had always wanted to work with Amberana, and like Adam said, creating these relationships. So Kelvin was able to offer us this. And that's what started it. And we have some really nice sherry barrels that were being offered to us. Again, this Amberana. We had some 30-year-old cognac, and I'm just like, nobody wants these, unfortunately, for beer. Beer is very specific. It's bourbon. It's rye whiskey. You can do some brandy and some weird things like this every now and again, and you could be thoughtful in your blending, and you could be very successful in that way. But Amberana is a tough one, I think, for beer. Sherry can be a tough one for beer. I've had luck with like Madeira and port, but it's always a bourbon that was finished, a finishing barrel, I should say. So I had all the opportunity to have all these barrels, and we just figured, well, what the hell? Why don't we just, again, with the rye whiskey. Let's source some rye whiskey. Let's blend it with let's figure out what single malt we can blend it with of ours and put our stamp on it. Speaking from a malt standpoint, and we did that. So we had this blend that we really liked, that mostly used a lot of the high rye bourbon from MGP, and actually Fat Pug was our one I mentioned earlier, that one double gold. So that makes its way into this Vibrations program as well. And it turns out these barrels were great for whiskey, obviously. Sherry is a no-brainer. The Amburana, if you haven't tried Amburana, if you're listening, it's phenomenal. I think, good or bad, it's phenomenal. It's just very interesting, very unique, and people love it or hate it, they will buy it. I think just so they can show it to their friends if they don't like it, because it's so unique and so interesting. It's the perfect, for me, exotic non-oak wood for whiskey, because it adds this cinnamon nutmeg character that's just unbelievable. We talked about barrel aging.
It's a super dominating wood. It really kind of takes over.
Intense.
Yeah. And I'm so intrigued, after talking about our discussion with, all these cool flavors that you're pulling out with all the different malt whiskeys that you have experimented with in your American single malt program, the caramel, the chocolate, and pairing that with Amburana. That sounds super intriguing to me. I've oftentimes seen people try to play with Amburana, but they have a really delicate new make spirit that they're trying to finish in Amburana, or a delicate finished whiskey that, are very fruit forward, and they clash, but those sound very copacetic, complementary, and I'm very intrigued by it.
Yeah, and with Amburana, I should mention, you just reminded me, Sydney, of a lot of people maybe being a little afraid of it and blending back. I've had a lot of samples from distilleries that were, blended with 30%, non-finished, just to take a little of that Amburana and make it a little more approachable. I personally did not subscribe to that thought process. We did 100% finish, no blend back, and it was in there for an insane amount of time, like almost 2 years, like 18 months, which is unheard of pretty much, right, for finishing. But we wanted this insane expression of Amburana, and we got it. And people have told us it's their favorite whiskey, which I think is just nuts, but it's good feedback. We've gotten good feedback off of it.
And I'll say, it's fun to see, you get all that, spiced up front, spice cake and cinnamon, nutmeg, like you guys were saying. And then on the finish, for me, I get all this intense, fruity vanilla. I perceive it almost as cookie dough ice cream or something like that, which sounds a little weird, but it's on the finish, and it adds it's got a lot going on, for a wood. It's kind of, it spans a large, area of aromas and flavors that it adds to the spirit. So it's something, at the very least, it's something that, is almost unmistakable, and it's new for a lot of people and exciting in that regard. And I think people will still continue to see what flavors they can pull from it. By putting different, obviously, malt forward whiskeys in it, or what have you, or trying to accent some of those notes that the wood has in it.
As you guys are developing this finishing program, it seems like you had such great success with this Amburana expression that you've made, and knowing all of the malt that you have available and the yeast that you have available, and being very well versed in those two drivers of flavors as brewers, do you envision yourself distilling spirits specifically for finishing, creating unique recipes that are specifically intended for a cognac cask or an XO cask or a sherry cask or an amberana cask or something like that. You see kind of my train of thought here?
Yes. And I have thought about that, but I haven't actually realized that, it's and it might be a byproduct of kind of just being busy and doing a lot already. But, and this program's the finishing program for us still being somewhat in its infancy. I just, have thought about that, but I haven't realized any of it yet. We had a cherry brandy barrel that was just like a very candied cherry, almost like maraschino cherry in a way, that I thought, God, if we could have just done a rye whiskey, right? Our 100% rye had this great malt character, and they just would have played so well off that, like a malted milk ball with these cherry notes and almond notes. And that, when I smelled that barrel, that was kind of just an inspiration for me. Was almost what you just said, Sydney. It's like, we should make something just for this barrel, So that idea has always been in the back of my head, but I haven't, like I said, I have not done it yet. We haven't written the recipe for the barrel yet, but I think it's there, and
we've done a
it
little
will happen
of that on the beer side. If we know we're getting a really cool barrel and we want to try to amp something up, but like Smith said, I would be shocked if that doesn't happen at some point on the whiskey or spirit side in general.
Yeah, the more I'm thinking about it, the more jazzed I'm getting about it in my brain, because I know so many craft distillers are like, we had the opportunity to buy like this barrel from our broker and it sounded cool, and we're just going to throw our normal stuff in it and hope for the best. And it is what it is when it comes out. But how cool would it be just to like really, really customize distillate for finishing purposes? It just sounds intriguing to me.
Yeah, I was going to say your love of gin barrel aged or barrel aged gin rather. There's something there for you. For like the gin barrel when it's done, like something needs to be put into that,
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Like I don't know yet, right? That's
something I always wanted to do and never got the chance to do. I really want to do a barrel aged Fernet and then make a whiskey for that ex Fernet barrel, because I'm a Fernet freak as well as a gin freak. I love Fernet.
Same.
And it just always sounded so interesting and weird and potentially disastrous as well. But I thought maybe it could be cool. So if y'all ever do anything like that, let me know. I will drive the 6 hours to you and get a bottle of it.
Well, geez. That's so funny because anyway, I don't want to open the conversation to aquavit, so I won't.
You can. Oh, you 1,000% can. Yeah, no, take us there.
But I did. But you did want me. I was going to go there, but I guess what more to the point, more to your point is, I've wanted to do Fernet barrel aged, that is, and I've had Fernet barrel aged beer stout that's been amazing, surprisingly. But that's something that we've wanted to do here for a while. We haven't barrel aged our Fernet yet. It's definitely something we've talked about. But then taking that stout, well, why not take our stout whiskey and put it in the Fernet, right? So now I think I'm finally getting to where you're, thinking.
Yeah. I'm very on board for this. I can see the wheels turning in your head right now, and it's making me really happy. No. Are you guys playing around with aquavit too?
We've always wanted to do an aquavit. We're just afraid that, it's so niche. I say that word wrong, but it's so niche that like we don't want to sit on it too long. Like all these products that we offer, and then we have an aquavit, and it's just I guess we're scared.
It's fair.
We're scared.
That is very
We're scared
fair.
to do an aquavit.
Is it potentially something you could just do for like your bar program? That's what I love about distilleries that have cool, innovative bar programs, and you develop things for them. You've got like your own perfect like little focus group that comes to your bar every weekend, you know?
Yeah, we really don't have
for
an
sure.
excuse. So I probably should make the aquavit, and they would totally be able to do something cool with it.
Yeah,
I'll have to talk to them today.
I'm invested.
That's it. We're in the aquavit game.
Yeah,
And this is the conversations you have with your bartenders.
Mhm.
Why not? Why not?
It's only one more
Sure.
SKU. It's fine. Listen, we have like 100. What's 101? Doesn't matter. Just add it to the list.
How does cola and formula even go for you guys? Getting all that through the TTB, especially some of these more
Oh, my
esoteric weird
God.
things.
Man, it is it's wild. It's wild. And it's never consistent. And it's always luck of the draw who the examiner is. And I've gotten pretty good. I have some canned responses to a lot of the random things that pop up whenever we try to talk about ingredients in our whiskey and what have you. And usually, with some of those that I've developed over the years of fighting against them, they go right through magically. After I send, I don't get it. It's so variable, and it makes everything so hard, and in the end, it just delays tax revenue for the government. So I don't know, but it's a fun journey every time we submit something new that's not, like that uses any sort of unique ingredient, I should say.
It's in my experience, which is very little. Adam does a lot of that. Adam and Ari do a lot of the formula submittal and TTB stuff, but my experience has been that the canned cocktails seem to be the hardest.
It's wild. It's
formulas,
crazy.
Yeah.
Sometimes
And
a lot
that is
could change.
always, that's what always has freaked me out so much about canned cocktails in terms of making them. Love drinking them, crush them like there's no tomorrow. There's no tomorrow. But like, I am not like a formal chemist, preservatives and, can liners and can integrity and all of these things that go into RTDs. It makes my brain spin a little bit. And I can't even imagine kind of where to start if I were to develop an RTD. Was it a more streamlined process for you guys coming from beer world, or was that just a totally different game, different process, different everything?
As the can liners and stuff, we can sour beers, and even our RTDs are within the acceptable tolerances for pH and stuff like that. I think initially we were we were concerned about stability and making sure things stay homogenous and how they're supposed to be. But having a beer canning background certainly has helped with getting these into cans. The process is, once it's all mixed up, is damn near identical for us. So I think that's given us maybe more confidence to start it. We knew kind of what pHs we wanted for stability. We knew like carbonation levels that we can successfully achieve in our cans and have them, be stable. We knew, cleaning practices and sanitation practices, which are still important from RTDs, even though they have brews in them. Or spirits at a higher, usually at a little bit of a higher content. We don't pasteurize ours. Yeah, stratification, mixing properly, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But most of that stuff we encountered on the beer side when we were doing interesting, I'd say, barrel-aged beers, and we're adding coconut and all these, peanut butter powder and all these other ingredients. So that experience, I think, has been huge in making us feel confident enough to, send out a RTD for the first time. And there was still some learning curve with that. Smith and Ari found what sugars work better for mixing and some stuff like that. So But as far as actual stability and can integrity and stuff like that, I think that was never really much of a concern, I'd say, as far as the can degradation or anything like that. It was more of just long-term stability and stratification, like Smith said, and having things not separate in the cans.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that, learning our lesson, a lot of now what we do is recirculation, helps with carbonation, helps with complete mix. We have a flexible impeller pump.
Yeah, I was going to say we're getting the right pump for that, and all that stuff was.
Yeah.
Fips are such a game changer.
That's right.
Love a good FIP. Love a good FIP.
Big time. But yeah,
Nice.
So we've learned a lot doing those, and now I'm the one who builds those pretty much. The new ones the recipes are written, with all that in mind as well. So how can this mix well? Can we utilize the right sugars? Natural flavors is something that we're really looking into, because, like Adam says, it's more homogenous. It's more shelf stable, and using juices and things like this we found are detrimental, really, to the product over time.
Unless you can pasteurize it or something like that, and
right.
I think that was probably maybe the biggest hurdle initially, is taking the initial few canned cocktails that we wanted to do, and you guys translating them from literal cocktail form that we would serve it in our tap room, to a canned version that was stable, and so I think there was a learning curve with that, because obviously you can't just scale up evenly and do it that way. But hey, it worked it out. A lot of things you come across, I guess, when you go through that.
But if we weren't brewers, and like you said, if we weren't brewing and canning beer already, it would have been a lot harder.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of horror stories about not only like TTB rejection for formula with RTD development, but exploding cans and dissolved liners and things like that. And there's a whole lot that goes into RTDs, but man, people love them.
That's one of the big things is when you go to a can format like that, we know, again, from the brewing side, what cleaning routines you got to do, what sanitizers you got to do, what X, Y, and Z you got to do, which is a little, it's quite a bit different than filling bottles of whiskey, and you're always worried about it, but it's less of a concern that you're not going to get a yeast carbon, like wild fermenting your packaged whiskey in carbon, like that type of stuff is foreign, I would say, to many distilleries. And those are the things you really got to think about if you're going to put something into a can, because you don't want it to blow up. You don't want bacteria in there. You don't want wild yeast in there. You don't want, really any of that in there. And then, but I mean, ideally, if you're going to do it, the safe bet is to pasteurize, but that's
or we're unable, as Adam said, but we just took one of our cocktails to our lab partner, and we're getting them plated for yeast and making sure that we're not sending out anything that can possibly go wrong, blow up,
Smart.
or whatever.
For sure. Yeah.
So we do our best.
That's all we can do.
That's all we can do, is we're doing the best we can.
We're doing the best we can. We're working with what we got.
I love it. I think RTDs have been such a big discussion in the industry lately, and the advice and the learning curves that you guys just shared, I know are going to be really invaluable for people that are starting to have those conversations at their own distilleries. And I think that's a great note to close on. But before we go, things to remember. For more than 30 years, G&D Chillers has had the proven solution for distilleries. Visit them today at gdchillers.com. Whether you're establishing a new distillery or expanding into a brew distillery like Maplewood, ABS Commercial is your full-service equipment manufacturer for equipment ranging from 50 liters up to 5,000 liters. Visit breweryworkshop.com to secure your ticket to this September's Brewery and Distillery Workshop. Going to be a lot of fun. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, go to spiritsanddistilling.com and sign up for our free newsletter. Comes out regularly, featuring news stories every week from some of the best writers and distillers in the distilling world. A lot of them are my friends. Great content there. Adam. If people want to learn more about Maplewood, what you guys are brewing, what you're distilling, they want to taste things for themselves, learn about the projects, the finishing, all that good stuff, how can they find out more information or dig a bit deeper?
MaplewoodBrew.com, or reach out on social media with all Maplewood Brew, our Instagram and all that fun stuff. Send us a note, send us an email. We're happy to. I don't know. One of the nice things about craft beer and even spirits world, I think a lot of the smaller guys like us are happy to share info, and it's been helpful for us. So if questions pop up, feel free to give us a shout, and if we can help, I'm sure we will.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with another in-depth distilling conversation for you. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
See ya. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Spirits and Distilling for those who love to make and drink great spirits. Join our free newsletter today at spiritsanddistilling.com for pragmatic, technical, and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Sign up now at spiritsanddistilling.com or click on the link in the show notes.